So I don't know about you, but um, I have very little knowledge about the climate crisis, and I thought this might be an interesting study. And I was put on the trail to this study by the son of one of Erieside Church's pastors. David Ryersey has a son named Rob Ryersey. And Rob works with Vote Common Good. And maybe you've heard of that organization. They traveled around the country talking a little bit about white nationalism at our last election. But one of the things that he did was sit on the board of this, it's called The Week. And supposedly, you're supposed to watch these 3 videos all in the same week, but each video's an hour long. And so we're going to break it up over 3 weeks. And I think it's a reminder for us that we have been commissioned as human beings to take care of the creation that God has placed into our hands as a gift. So the way we're going to work this tonight is I am going to start a video through a video share on the website of The Week, and hopefully it'll go well, and we'll be able to watch it. Now, I did boil down this information on the handout that I sent to you, and this is just an outline to kind of follow along in the video. But what I would like for you to do is, if you have a pencil, if while you're watching this video, you have certain questions that pop up, and just jot it down on that handout, and we'll talk a little bit after the video is completed. I promise you I do not have probably many answers on any questions that you might have. So this is not looking to my knowledge base. It's just kind of conversing together on things that have made an impression upon you. So we're going to start this climate change crisis study by watching the video and then taking as much time as you feel comfortable with. Each video is an hour long, and so it will go a little bit longer than our normal study time. And yet clarification often happens through mutual questions and insights and the things that impress you. So with all of that said, I want to share the screen, and we're going to take a look at this video. This is the website here called The Week, and you can see here Shade Tree Wednesday study, start day 1, and then if you go to the week.000, it's an interesting extension because this comes out of the Netherlands, I believe it is, and you can find here additional resources down here, the film notes and different things like that, but it's quite extensive, and so I thought it would be easier to follow by just giving you some bullet points, and hopefully that'll work well. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start day 1, and I'm going to minimize us off the screen, and then I'll pop it back up after the movie is finished. Okay, so let's get started, and hopefully everything will work well. And as we get started, I hope you learned something, as hopefully I will get this to work. Here it comes. All right, here we go.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Week.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Disaster.
Bonjour à tous, bienvenue dans The Week.
Hi and welcome to The Week.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
Willkommen zu The Week.
Glad you're here.
My name is Frank Johnson.
My name's Ashley McClure.
John and Holly Arbuckle at Singing Pastors Farm.
My name is Yancey, and I'm really glad that you're here.
Bah ça y est, c'est le premier épisode, donc je vous souhaite vraiment de vivre une belle expérience.
And so excited that you're settling in and hope that you enjoy this conversation and that it's really meaningful.
Mettez votre ceinture parce que ça va décoiffer pas mal aujourd'hui.
1, 2, 3. Perfect.
Welcome.
Yes, welcome everyone. Right now you might be at home with your friends or your family, or maybe you're at work with your colleagues.
And yeah, it's exciting for us to picture you wherever you are with your group, and we're grateful that you decided to join us.
My name is Helen,
And I'm Frederick.
and we're married. We have 2 kids. They're 8 and 11. I'm French. Fred is from Belgium, where we met years ago, hence our accent, so please bear with us. And we now live in the United States.
And 3 years ago, we went through a profound shift. Before that, we sort of knew that things are in a bad shape when it comes to, the climate and the environment. But it felt abstract, like it didn't really feel like it had anything to do with our own lives. And plus it felt pretty depressing. So we kind of, did our best to tune it out and not engage with it. And then one day, good friends of ours came to visit. And we were impressed by their courage to really grapple with this. And it made it real for us. And so, when they left, I remember we looked at each other and they said, like, if they have the courage to do this, we should be able to do it too.
And so when they left, we had this urge to learn everything we could. We read and researched and watched documentaries. And along the way, we met amazing people who also have been on a similar journey to face this reality.
And for us, facing this was a real shock. We went on what could best be described like a U-shaped journey. At first, it brought up lots of, sadness and fear and anger.
But luckily, we didn't get stuck there. We came out on the other side with lots of energy, with lots of clarity about what was important and what we wanted to do with our lives.
And after we went through this, we invited some of our friends to go on a similar journey. And, this was the pandemic, so we did it on video calls.
Hi, I'm Hélène.
Yeah, I'm Frederick. And and they liked it so much that they invited some of their friends and then their friends. And it started to gather steam. And at some point we figured, let's turn this into films, make them free, and see what happens.
All right, all ready? Yep. 1, 2, 3.
And we met this wonderful film team. And long story short, here we are together with you to do this.
And it's not just us. Every day, everywhere around the world, thousands of people are coming to terms with what's happening. And in this film, you'll meet a few of them. 9 people we fell in love with and who said yes when we asked them if they would share with us and with you how they came to face this issue and what they decided to do about it.
So there's Ashley, a family doctor in California. There is Ophélie in France, who works in construction.
There's Frank in Memphis, Tennessee, who fights the pollution that has devastated his community. Scarlett, a student and activist in England, who saw the consequences of climate change in Kashmir, where her parents are from.
We have John and Holly, 9th generation farmers who made the leap to regenerative agriculture. And also Pauline in Paris, who rallied colleagues to make changes from within her workplace.
Yancy in Arizona, an ex-Marine and grandfather who left the oil industry to work for an electric truck company. And finally, we have Peter, or Peter, a German lawyer who for 25 years has had an impressive string of wins in court to protect our future. Some of them live in North America, the others in Europe. And we focused on these 2 continents because we have no lived experience elsewhere. So we didn't feel quite qualified to talk about Asia, South America, or Africa.
That being said, if you live outside of Europe or the US and you want to create a local version of the week for where you live, please reach out because we'd love to help you make it happen.
Yeah. So Ashley, Frank, Pauline, Scarlett,
Peter, John, Holly,
Ophélie, Yancy, us, we're all really different. We're different in terms of our age, our jobs, our politics. Some of us are religious, others are not. We're different in how much or how little money we've got left at the end of the month. But we have one thing in common. Each of us had the courage to really look into the environmental breakdown that's happening and then figured out what we wanted to do about it.
And this is exactly what we're inviting you to do with us now. We're going to meet 3 times over the course of a week. You know, that's why we called it The Week. And each time we'll start with a 1-hour film, and then we'll invite you to have a conversation with your group for something like 30 to 45 minutes.
So we'll go through the You together. In episode 1, we'll go down the rabbit hole to really understand the situation we're in. In episode 2, we'll examine how we got into this mess and what it would take to get out of it. And in episode 3, we'll look into the question, what can I do? What can we do?
And there's one more person that we want to introduce to you. You know, to share with you everything we learned, we looked for a narrator, you know, like they do in films, you know, somebody with a good voice. And we figured, you know, instead of hiring some random actor that we wouldn't know, that we'd ask our friend Seamus, you know, who lives up the road and who has a great voice.
Yeah.
La.
Yeah, we've been told that he speaks good English.
She sells seashells by the seashore.
Oh, don't ask me to do that.
And yeah, all of the research that Seamus will share has been looked over by a conservation scientist and a climate scientist to make sure that it's really solid and that it's, you know, of course, in line with, you know, the consensus of the scientific community. And if you're interested to go deeper into any of this, you know, every time we'll share a fact, you'll see a little orange dot in the corner of the screen, you know, somewhere here for you, I guess. And it means that you can look up the source material on the Week's website.
As for us, you'll see that sometimes we'll be reading from a sheet of paper. Well, that's exactly for the same reason. We want to make sure that we get things as right as possible.
Okay, this being said, you know,
Yeah.
today is day 1 and it's the hard day. You know, it's where we go down the You together and face what's coming. You know, if I have a serious illness, I want to know exactly where I'm at so I can do something about it. And it's the same with this crisis. Like in 10 or 20 or 30 years, I want to be able to say, I have no regrets. Like I knew what was coming and I did what I wanted to do. And that's why we created the Week. Like we feel that everyone has a right to look into this and then to decide for themselves what they want to do about this or not.
And if you're one of the people who've been grappling deeply with this already, maybe even for years, we invite you to still go fully into the experience and see what might show up for you this time.
Okay, let's jump right in. We've come to understand that the reason most people aren't terrified about the environmental crisis is that we tend to take it in pieces.
We see floods in the news or a catastrophic spill somewhere. It might be shocking, yes, but we also have to rush to work.
You know, and the next day we might hear about massive wildfires and how they will happen more and more often as the world gets warmer, but then we also have dinner to fix, right?
And it's not like we don't know what's happening, but it never comes together to make a complete picture. And it's hard to see how it has anything to do with our own lives.
And today we don't want to do that. Today we want to lay out all the big pieces on the table like we do with a puzzle. And then we'll try to assemble it so that we can take in the big picture and see, you know, what's actually there. Seamus, over to you.
The first big piece we'll talk about is how the living world is collapsing everywhere around the world. Life is this incredible miracle. So much beauty that's been around forever. We sometimes hear about one or another species that is endangered or disappearing. But most of us don't realize that it's almost every form of life that's declining, every year a bit more, everywhere on Earth. Let's look at a few examples. Take birds. In the US, a third of all birds have disappeared in the past 50 years. With regards to insects, the most detailed study ever done in Germany shows that the speed of disappearance is even faster, and they're still declining. You might remember road trips from your childhood with a windshield full of insects, but that's no longer the case. Large fish have disappeared to an even greater degree. There are only 10% left. The oceans are almost empty. Forests, we lose an area the size of Italy every year. The same decline happens with wetlands, mangroves, corals, and topsoil. So much has disappeared in just 1 or 2 generations. And it continues so fast that in our lifetime, if we continue on our current trajectory in many places, some of these could dangerously approach 0. Here's a piece of data that shows how much life has already vanished. Take all the wild mammals that live everywhere in this beautiful world. Separately, let's take all of us humans and our livestock. Now let's imagine we put these 2 groups on a scale and compare their weight. Take a guess. Which group do you think is heavier? We, humans and our livestock, now represent 96% of the mass of all mammals on Earth. We've overrun everything else. Wild mammals are down to 4%, and that's all that's left, and they're still declining.
What we're experiencing right now, scientists call it a mass extinction event, the 6th mass extinction on Earth. I remember learning in high school about the 5 mass extinctions that have happened millions of years ago and wiped out most of life. It's mind-blowing when I read and try to grapple with the fact that that we are now in the middle of, there is no other term for it, we're in the middle of a mass extinction.
There comes a moment where we push this so far that it boomerangs back at us. I don't know if you've played the game Kerplunk when you were little, but it's a good way to visualize how these extinctions relate to us.
In the game, you take turns taking out a stick. The goal is to not let the marbles fall. Imagine for a second that each marble is a species: insects, birds, trees, everything that makes up an ecosystem. One of the marbles is us, humans. Every time we take over an ecosystem, clear a forest, drain a swamp, create monocultures, it's like we pull out a stick. At first, not much happens, so we keep going. But then one marble drops. A species goes extinct someplace. Then another and another. Until you take just one more stick and suddenly, nearly all the marbles come crashing down. Ecosystems behave in a somewhat similar fashion. They're remarkably resilient until they suddenly collapse. Here's an example from a place where we've pushed overfishing just a bit too far. Suddenly, this ecosystem collapsed, and the jellyfish population exploded and completely took over and crowded out the remaining fish and everything else.
We humans tend to think that we're separate from nature. But when oceans are empty and forests are gone, when there are no insects to pollinate all our crops, we human beings come crashing down with the rest. We could stop the first episode here and just deal with this one fact of mass extinction and let it sink in. But unfortunately, there is a lot more happening. Life collapsing is just one of the 3 crises we'll be talking about today.
The next crisis is pollution. Since the Industrial Revolution, people all over the world have been exposed to pollution, often without even knowing about it. But now it's catching up with us. Frank knows about this firsthand. He lives in Memphis, Tennessee, in a community that's been devastated by pollution.
I was a typical child from South Memphis, growing up in the late 70s, early 80s. I was like the first person to have a fade, so I brought the fade in 1977, 78, or whatever this was. It was really a great time. But in the midst of that, we started noticing some...
Je me dis, ce qu'on voit là, on le respire, ça passe à l'intérieur de nous, dans nos poumons. Ça fait peur en fait.
Pollution is a health risk multiplier. It increases the risk of so many different things. I'm already seeing way more patients with respiratory problems like asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, lung diseases.
There's another form of pollution that's found everywhere, but even less visible. Something we didn't know 50 years ago when we started producing plastic is that the plastic we throw out or the plastics in the clothes we might be wearing right now break down into microplastics. Tiny invisible bits that are carried everywhere, literally everywhere. Researchers have gone to the most remote place on Earth, the Arctic. And when they melted a gallon of ice, they found it contains, are you ready, 53,000 particles of plastic, carried for thousands of miles by the wind. Microplastic is everywhere, in the ocean, in the rain, and the rivers. It's in your tap water. It's in bottled water. It's been found in beer and salt. It's in the air we're breathing right now, the air you're breathing too. According to researchers at the University of Newcastle in Australia, in 1 week we eat, drink, and breathe the equivalent of 1 credit card in plastic. That's 4 a month. It's even found in the placenta of pregnant mothers and in our bloodstream. Most likely there are microplastics in your bloodstream. What this is doing to our health we don't yet know. What we do know is that industry experts predict that plastic production won't decrease, but most likely increase by a factor of 4 in the next 30 years. How much plastic will end up in our bodies? And plastic is just one form of pollution. Meanwhile, we've released chemicals, pesticides, and heavy metals everywhere. You've probably also read that our rivers, lakes, and drinking water are full of medications like antidepressants and hormones. We know that this is doing weird things. Scientists have found that even in what may look like pristine lakes and rivers and national wildlife refuges, the chemicals and medication in the water disrupt the hormonal systems of wildlife and turn male fish into half-female beings. They have eggs in their testicles. It's in the water we humans drink also. Infant boys are developing more genital abnormalities and smaller penises. More girls are experiencing early puberty. Adult women appear to be suffering declining egg quality and significantly more miscarriages. In men, there's a boom in two-headed sperm. An international team, including researchers from the School of Medicine of Mount Sinai in New York, found that in just 40 years, the human sperm count in Western countries went down by almost 60%. Following the current trend, the team of researchers suggested sperm count could reach 0 in 20 years.
I don't know how this lands with you, but 20 years, that's exactly about the time that our children could want to become parents. And so for me, this doesn't just feel like, some science article. Like when I look at our children and I don't know what's happening in their body, it feels really personal and disturbing.
So we talked about life collapsing, about pollution, and of course we all know this, it's getting warmer. But before we dive in, let's start with a little science refresher on what the atmosphere is and why it's getting warmer.
Our planet is surrounded by the atmosphere, a very thin layer of air. Incredibly thin, but absolutely vital. It's a blanket that protects us from freezing. Without it, heat would simply go back into outer space. Gases in the atmosphere let the sun rays through, but trap some of that solar energy, and that keeps us warm. The trouble is, when we burn coal, oil, gas, or forests, we release huge quantities of carbon dioxide, methane, and similar gases into the atmosphere, which makes the blanket get thicker and thicker. It's the reason you don't leave a dog or a kid in a car alone on a sunny day with the windows up. If the sun is shining hard, of course, you leave the windows a bit open. Otherwise, the closed windows trap the heat and your dog or child might die. That's what's happening to the Earth right now. We're closing the windows and it's getting hotter and hotter.
With all the gas we've added, the world has become 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer already. That's 2 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't sound like much, but it turns out that the world's thermostat is really, really sensitive. Right? It's kind of like our body. When our body temperature increases by 1 degree Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit, we start to have fever.
And maybe you remember the heat dome of 2021 when it was so hot that all the way north in Canada, A town self-combusted and burned down in a day. Extreme weather events have always happened. But now, normal is no longer normal. Not when a city like Houston, Texas, has experienced a 500-year flood 3 years in a row. And do you remember these images? This was San Francisco, during the day. This is smoke from the massive fires. Ashley, the family doctor in California, was right there.
So I was on maternity leave, and I was nursing her in the breakfast nook, and the Paradise Fire started. It was like one of the historically worst fires in California. The smoke was terrible, and I couldn't take her outside for 13 days. I was bringing the air purifier right beside her and trying to shut the doors of the room, trying to keep her safe. I feel like I was seeing her future and all of our children's future. It brought the climate crisis from that intellectual, cerebral, somewhere else, someone else, not my life. It brought it all home. And, I was like watching it and just tears falling onto her as I realized, like, I've just been asleep.
Global warming doesn't only mean things get warmer, it means weather patterns get out of whack. We get floods and droughts that didn't used to exist for 1,000 years. Droughts all the way up to Sweden and Canada. Floods like we've never seen in Germany, Belgium, the UK, and so many other places. Weather patterns are changing everywhere.
And more of us are experiencing this firsthand. Polls show that people everywhere, farmers, city folk, conservatives, progressives, moderates, are now concerned or alarmed with how the climate is changing.
And as we said, in these films, we're focusing on Europe and North America. But if we want to see what the future holds for us here, we only need to look to some parts of the world where things are already much worse.
Take Malawi in East Africa. Because of droughts, floods, and certain farming practices, farmers' corn yield per acre fell from 7 bags to below 3. The country can no longer reliably feed itself. Put yourselves in the shoes of people there. Malawi contributed almost nothing, less than 0.1%, a rounding error, to the warming blanket, but they're hit really hard. Or take Syria and its brutal civil war. It started in 2011 after the country suffered the worst 5-year drought in its history. 1.5 million farmers had to give up their land and move to overcrowded cities and find a way to scrape by. These droughts were devastating, and many analysts believe they were a critical factor in sparking the mass protests that Syria's dictator then ruthlessly suppressed, leading to the terrible civil war. 6 million people had to flee their homes to neighboring countries, and 1 million found refuge in Europe. What the people in Malawi and Syria have been through might just be what we'll face in the future too.
Okay, let's pause for a second and do a quick timeout. I don't know how this all lands with you. This can be pretty hard or even overwhelming. And maybe for some of you, it's not. Like I've noticed that sometimes to protect myself from bad news, there are some protection mechanisms that seem to pop up, kind of unconsciously. It's like my brain is trying to protect me. And over time, we've noticed that it comes in a number of different shapes, and we wanted to share that with you. A first mechanism that I notice a lot is that we might tune out. Maybe you've looked at your phone, earlier during this film. I know that I do that a lot, just to zone out for a second. Number 2 is denial. Maybe during this film you've been thinking, it can't be this bad, or, what do these people know? Number 3 is, I already know this. There's nothing new for me to hear. No need for me to engage with this again.
Or 4, wishful thinking. Maybe you've been thinking, well, someone will come up with some technology that will make things okay. Or 5, this won't affect me. I'll be okay. This is a problem for other people. I'm in a safe place, or I'm resourceful enough. Or 6, jumping to solutions. If only people did this or that, or I'm already doing this and I'm already doing that, so I'm doing my part and I can stop thinking about it.
Look at the list, and see if one or several have happened to you, during the film so far. If you're like me, like it will have happened, right? It's okay, and it's normal. Like it's normal to be heartbroken or fearful or angry. Something like heartbreaks, serves a really important purpose. It reveals to us what we care about, what is precious to us, so precious that it hurts and that we feel moved to do something about it. And so here's my invitation to you, if you catch this happening again, it's okay. Just try to go back and focus on the film again.
Okay, so let's go back. The planet is getting hotter and the weather increasingly out of whack. And when we started reading up on this, we read about what scientists predict will happen at some point in the future, say in 2050. And to be honest, at first, 2050, it sounded quite far away.
Until one day we simply calculated how old we will be in 2050 and how old our children will be. And to us, that was like a real shock, because we realized, like, hey, in 2050, we'll be in our mid-70s. So hopefully we'll still be around and healthy and happy and happily retired. And we realized that our kids will be in their 30s. They'll be younger than we are today. And, we don't feel that old, right? And suddenly everything that we were reading about the world in 2050 no longer felt abstract. It really hit home.
So now we often ask our friends to do the same calculation.
In 2050, I would be 69.
J'aurais 56.
46. J'aurai 57 ans en 2050.
In 30 Jahren bin ich fast 90, wenn ich dann noch 90 bin.
So how about you? How old will you be in 2050?
Just take your age and add roughly 25 or 30 years.
Now think of a child in your life you care about.
Your own child or a niece or a nephew or, just a child that's important to you.
Think about my nephews.
My children.
Je pense à Lency, ma nièce.
My great-grandchildren.
Who are you thinking of? If you're all in the same room, we invite you to say the name aloud to the other people in your group.
Yeah, like seriously, say the name
Do
out
it.
loud.
Yeah. Even if it feels weird at first, or if you're all speaking at the same time, or if no one dares to start, there is something powerful in saying their name out loud.
Now, add 25 or 30 years to their age too, and say that number out aloud as well.
In 2050, Kala will be 32. Potentiellement parents d'enfants qui ont une vingtaine d'années.
So Noah is 43 and Zia is 40, right?
Wenn ich 90 bin, dann wären meine Kinder 42 und 45.
Je pense à Lency, ma nièce. Elle aura 34 ans.
At that age, what's the kind of life you would want them to have, in a normal world, right? If there wasn't any mass extinction or pollution or warming.
I want my grandson's life to be relaxed, stress-free.
I see my children sweet and healthy and happy.
We have some fans. She'll probably have a career, maybe, of some kind. She'll be kind of establishing herself, I would think. J'aurais peut-être encouragé mes enfants à faire des études en innovation pour... Enfin bon, bien sûr, ce qui leur plairait. Je le souhaite à tout le monde, pas qu'à mes futurs enfants.
Je crois que des enfants qui grandiraient dans un monde normal.
Moi, je me souhaiterais d'être en bonne santé, d'être heureuse, en fin de carrière professionnelle.
Dass meine Familie größer geworden ist, dass meine Kinder, dass sie dann ihre eigenen Kinder haben und dass man dort wäre mit der großen Familie und ich wäre Teil dieser Familie. Wenn sich das verwirklichen würde, dann würde ich sagen, das Leben hat sich wirklich gelohnt.
Hummingbirds flying by, sitting out on the porch with my grandson, just sharing stories and just looking forward to getting up every morning.
In 2050, I'd like to be a trauma surgeon. I would have liked to have met Taylor Swift, who is my favorite singer. I would be a backing singer any day.
You know, at nighttime, we can sit up and, you know, just dream on the stars. Let our imaginations go and create, you know, and do all of these wonderful things that I think that we were meant to do.
These are the kinds of things we might all wish for ourselves. But unless we massively turn the ship around, 2050 is not going to look like this at all. All the fires and wars and refugees we talked about earlier are just the beginning. Because we've been adding so much warming gas to the blanket in the last few years, the world is now getting hotter really fast.
A group of scientists in Switzerland found a clever way for us to get a sense of how quickly things will change. They published a study where they project, for all large cities around the world, what the weather will be like in 30 years. For example, what kind of climate will Montreal and Toronto have in 2050? It'll be pretty much like Washington, D.C. is today. That's the closest match the group of scientists found. No more snow, but mosquitoes. Boston, it'll be like Charlotte, North Carolina today. Chicago will be like Kansas City, and Kansas City will be like Dallas. Portland, Oregon will move south all the way to San Antonio. For San Diego, the closest match is Tripoli in Libya. Austin, Texas, Peshawar, Pakistan. Los Angeles, Hargeisa in Somalia. In Europe, Helsinki and Tallinn will move 1,600 kilometers south to Bratislava. Paris will move to Istanbul, Rome to Izmir in Turkey, and Madrid, the closest match is Tehran in Iran. It's as if the whole of Europe and the US moves hundreds of miles, and some bits drift off in less than 30 years.
Think about where you live and what makes it feel like home for you. You know, whatever feels like home will change. You know, maybe you're into hiking or hunting or fishing or skiing. Well, the kinds of trees and fish and animals you're used to are likely to change dramatically when your home moves hundreds of miles down the map. The kind of farming and economy might not be the same. Cities will become much hotter, sometimes too hot to enjoy city lives. Whatever you call home is going to change a lot.
So life collapsing, pollution, warming, we're all going to be affected in some way.
We can't predict exactly when and how things will hit us. You know, scientists have really powerful models, but they don't have a crystal ball. But we do have a pretty good sense of what is most likely to hit us. It's migration and food shortages. Let's start with the first one, with migration. There are lots of places where we live that might not have a future. If you live there, you will have to move.
Say you live in an area that's affected more and more often by repeat fires, droughts, floods, or hurricanes. There comes a point where insurance companies calculate that the risk has become too high and they pull out and stop offering coverage. Banks stop making mortgage loans, which means no more house buyers and house prices collapse. A few people see it coming and are lucky to sell just in time. Most others will see the equity they built up suddenly wiped out. The community shrinks, there are less taxes to support it, and the school system and civic services falter, pushing more people to leave. Everyone will be affected, but whoever can't afford to leave, usually the elderly and working class people, will stay behind and suffer the most.
And perhaps this sounds extreme, but it's already starting to happen. You know, for example, after Hurricane Andrew, insurance companies pulled out of many places in Florida.
those communities would have collapsed. The Florida legislature created a state-run insurance scheme forced to offer coverage for places that no private insurer will touch anymore. But the climate risk hasn't disappeared. In no time, it's Florida's taxpayers who took on a massive insurance risk, $511 billion, more than 7 times the state's total budget. That risk can't be sustainable. It's not just Florida where the writing is on the wall for some communities. There are places throughout the U.S. where people start to realize that their town might not make it. In North and South Carolina, in Louisiana, in New Mexico, California, Alaska. Across the Atlantic in the UK, the town of Fairborn is already a step further. It's not just a hypothetical situation. It's officially being decommissioned. It's like pronouncing a death sentence on a community. Sea levels are rising, and building a seawall to protect Fairborn from floods is too costly. Not everything can be saved, and the government is abandoning Fairborn to the elements. People who live there will be forced to leave by 2054 at the latest. Banks no longer give mortgages, and house prices have collapsed. There are currently no plans to compensate homeowners whose asset value was wiped out.
Local and national governments will have to make more and more of these heartbreaking calls. Which places get saved through seawalls, flood protection, and water pipes, and which won't? And when decision makers rule that a place is not worth saving, will people like you and I, will we go quietly, or will we fight with everything we have?
It's not just sea level rise like in Fairborn. People will have to move away from places that become too hot to live comfortably. Remember the heat wave of 2003 in Europe that caused 70,000 deaths? It was the hottest year on record in 500 years. By 2040, that will be an average summer. In 2050, scientists believe almost every summer will be hotter and some much hotter.
Banks and financial investors obviously watch this closely. They buy expensive reports to determine where it's becoming too risky to invest. We were able to put our hands on some of the maps in those reports, prepared by a firm called Moody's.
When it comes to hurricanes, these are the places deemed at high risk. This is where you might find yourself stranded if insurance companies, banks, and investors pull out. Here are the communities Moody's warns investors about because they'll experience severe water stress. When water gets scarce, people leave. These are the places where communities might not have a future because of recurring wildfires. Here are the communities where the heat stress in the summer will be so intense that working outside becomes impossible during the day, which brings down the local economy. And then there's extreme rainfalls and rising sea levels.
Do you or do any of your friends or anyone in your group live in one of those places? Investors worry about their money, but for each of us who live in these places, we've got much more at stake. We're busy building up our lives and communities, and all the while a storm is brewing that might destroy it all and knock us back to zero.
The US military has done a similar assessment. This map shows the military bases inside the US they're worried will suffer from floods, heat stress, fires, or sea levels rising. It's all over the place.
And we've put the maps you've just seen on the Week's website. So after this episode, you can look up what they say.
So in 2050, there's a serious risk that either you'll have moved or live in a place that people move away from, or, as is in our case in upstate New York, that you live in a place where lots of people will want to move to.
This animation is based on important work published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The red zones on this map show the places that are unlivable hot zones today. It's 1% of the world's surface. In 2050, these are the areas projected to become so hot that life is almost impossible. And 20 years later, it's even worse. Global warming doesn't really capture this. It's more like global scorching. Estimates for climate refugees worldwide in 2050, that's less than 30 years from now, range from 200 million to 1 billion. Some of Central America and large parts of Africa will be unlivable hot zones, and millions will do whatever it takes to make it to the US and Europe to survive. Climate migration is already happening. Not long ago, 9,000 climate refugees from Honduras fled north following Hurricane Eta. They were turned back with clubs and tear gas at the Guatemalan border. Every year, 1,000 to 5,000 migrants die trying to reach Europe.
What will happen as this intensifies? Will we let refugees die on the other side of the border? Will Canada erect a border wall to keep people from the US from moving north? Will northern Scandinavia turn back boats from mainland Europe?
That's 2050 when it comes to migration. It's not that far away. Just remember how old you'll be, or the child that you thought about in 2050 when they will experience this. Okay, it's time to move to our next topic, food.
There are 7.9 billion people on Earth right now, and there might be close to 10 billion of us in 2050. How are we going to feed all of us? There are 6 major breadbaskets in the world. Each one of them will face major issues. For example, in the Midwestern United States, extreme heat waves, droughts, and floods could cause large-scale crop failures. Not to mention that this breadbasket sits squarely on the Ogallala Aquifer, the biggest in the United States, and it's being pumped dry. Already, California faces massive water shortages because the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains no longer feeds the rivers reliably, and the aquifers there, too, are running dry. No water, no food. Every one of the 6 major breadbaskets faces new risks, and by 2050, researchers believe that 1 year out of 3, 2 breadbaskets or more will fail at the same time, leading to hunger and social unrest. The risks on the food system are piling on just when we need to find a way to feed 2 more billion people.
It's hard also to imagine how we'll avoid terrible wars. Just take this one case. India and Pakistan will be parched, right? In red again here, the zone's so hot it will be almost unlivable. You know, India and Pakistan, that's 2 billion people with nowhere to go, right? Trapped between the Himalayas and the Indian Oceans. You know, in 2 countries who already have tense military relationships. They both have nuclear weapons. And so do 7 other countries in the world.
Closer to home, it sometimes feels like our democracies are already hanging on by a thread. And I really do worry. Can they last for another 30 years? Where there'll be millions of internal and external refugees and tensions rise to a whole new level? When some towns get saved with expensive infrastructure and others not? And when there'll be food shortages? Will there be riots and violence? These are all legitimate questions. And perhaps you think we shouldn't worry, but the fact that we're even discussing this, discussing if these dominoes will fall or if they will stand, that in itself feels crazy to me.
And we know this is a lot of information to take in. You know, if you need to stretch for a second, you know, or move around, you know, feel free to do so. Because if this wasn't bad enough, there's one more thing we need to talk about that could make everything a whole lot worse. The big thing that scientists worry about are what they call tipping points. You know, if the warming passes certain thresholds, you know, it sets off chain reactions that speed up the warming even more. And each one of those tipping points is like a booby trap that can't be stopped once it's set off.
For example, by 2050, the Amazon rainforest, because so much of it has been cut back, might reach the point where the water cycle changes and the remaining forest dries out, burns, and turns into a savanna. we'll lose the most magnificent ecosystem in the world, and with it, the indigenous communities with their ancestral traditions and wisdom. And the smoke of half a continent will add a whole new layer to the atmosphere. In Alaska, Russia, and Canada, the permafrost, the ground that is permanently frozen, starts to thaw, and it releases huge amounts of methane into the atmosphere, a gas that traps 80 times more heat than carbon dioxide. If we hit these tipping points, things spiral out of control, and we land in what scientists call a hothouse scenario, where climate systems shift to something entirely new, and civilization as we know it is likely to collapse. These tipping points are one of the reasons the United Nations and others say we must keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius, and preferably below 1.5 degrees.
Here's the crazy thing. If we don't significantly change course, we might see a rise in temperature of 2 degrees Celsius by 2050. And that's when some of the booby traps might go off. That's in my lifetime. And you know, people who are totally freaking out about climate change, well, they're doing so because of this.
Yeah, I wonder how it all lands with you. Clearly for us, it changed the whole way we think about our future. We had to grieve the normal future that we thought that we'd have, and everyone we know who grapples deeply with this seems to go through this in their own way.
We're facing extinction level events around here. We're looking at environmental collapse. It scares me for my nephews. My oldest nephew is 24. My youngest one is 19. And that can probably be one of the main reasons why I don't have kids now.
I remember I had this fear, like, what if it actually pushes away and I just, like, fall?
Like, even when I hear the question, do I want grandkids? It's like, of course I want grandkids. And at the same time, it feels like a little electric shock at my heart, because right now I don't see things changing fast enough. Like, if it's my kids and they're having kids and there are these awful things that have gotten worse, I need to be able to say, I tried to do my best, because it does wake me up in the middle of the night.
J'aime la vie. Voilà. Et en fait, j'ai pas envie de me dire qu'à 56 ans, potentiellement, ma vie, elle s'arrête parce qu'on prend pas soin de cette foutue planète, en fait. Et aujourd'hui, c'est ça, en fait. J'ai envie de vivre, et j'ai envie de profiter, et j'ai envie que les gens qui m'entourent puissent le faire également, en fait.
Bah finalement, c'est pas à 20 ans qu'on se projette. Ça n'a pas de sens d'ébaucher des stratégies dans un contexte aussi incertain. Donc c'est plutôt désapprendre à se projeter. Ça fait partie des deuils qui font mal.
I'm brown, so from Kashmir as well, not just the Netherlands. And I know that I can't visit where my ancestors came from because it's been destroyed by flooding. That's kind of something I've always grown up with, knowing.
Dann habe ich ganz große Angst, wie meine Kinder eigentlich noch leben können. Und ich weiß nicht, was mit ihnen dann passieren wird, wenn es nicht mehr genug zu essen gibt, wenn das Wasser nicht mehr ausreicht, wenn es keine Wohnungen mehr gibt, die bewohnt werden können. Und das ist aber das Szenario, das uns tatsächlich droht.
Will our kids have the chance to make the choice to be parents? Will it be possible to want to have a kid in 20 or 30 years? I don't know. And it makes me feel so sad and guilty for my generation that we could be robbing all of the humans to come from making that choice. If we love our kids, we need to be revolting. We need to change everything. And we're not.
I used to picture my future when I'm older with some of the things that my parents love in their life today. They're retired, they cook good food, they love gardening, they love spending time with their grandkids. And that's what I would like for us too, of course. But I've come to accept that's not what's going to happen. Most likely, unless we radically turn things around. When I'm old, when we're old, it won't be a happy retirement, but most likely the hardest years of our lives.
We know that Raphael and Noemi, our children, will most likely face real suffering, probably hunger and violence in our lifetime and after we die and we're no longer around to protect them. You know, this is my daughter Noemi. The thing that breaks my heart over and over again is when Raphael and Noemi come up all excited and share something about when they will have children. You know, daddy, you know, there's this picture book, you know, can I keep it for my children? And I try to smile and I say yes, and inside my heart breaks because I know that you'll want to have children around 20, 40 or 50. And, you know, unless we massively change course, I don't know if you'll want to have children by then. But I don't say this and I smile, and because I feel like they still have a right to some innocence. Like, you know, it's too early to tell them.
This is it for today. And part of you might feel relieved that we addressed this topic head on.
Or perhaps you're just glad, you know, it's finally over.
And maybe none of this comes as a surprise to you. Or perhaps you feel numb, or you're feeling anger or shock or sadness or disbelief or all of the above.
And maybe what's most present for you is one of the protection mechanisms we talked about earlier. Like, you know, I already knew all this, or it can't be this bad, or, you know, I'm already doing my part, so I don't need to think about this. Whatever you feel, in our experience, it's okay. You know, this you that we talked about earlier looks a little bit different for everyone.
And in a minute, when the film is over, we'll invite you to have a conversation about this with your group. We've prepared a little conversation starter you can use to kick things off.
And after the conversation, when you go back to your life, we have this suggestion for you. Try to stay with whatever you're feeling, even or especially if it's uncomfortable.
And try not to numb yourself or throw yourself into the next activity. Stay with it, soak it in, and the sadness, the anger we can feel is important. It's normal and it serves an important purpose.
Because in our experience, the more we allow ourselves to feel this, the more energy will come up at some point in us to do something about this. And I know it can be tempting to suppress those feelings, but then we're also cutting ourselves off from the energy that they might give us.
That being said, if you feel really anxious and you need support, please ask for help. Talk to a friend. We have also put some resources for you online. There's a button that says, I need support, click on it. Don't keep this to yourself if you feel overwhelmed.
Remember, you know, why do we choose to go through this? Because we have a right to know, right? Everyone has a right to know. And then we have a right to decide what we want to do about it, so that if we choose to do so, we can say, I have no regrets.
And just so you know, today was the hardest part. Stay with us for parts 2 and 3. Frankly, this would be the worst time to stop. And the next time, it's all going to be about the big question, so now what? Is there still hope?
We'll zoom out and try to understand, how did we get into this mess, and is there a way out? Because we've got to fix this. You know, after all, there is no place else for us to go.
So see you soon for episode 2, and before that, in a minute, to kick off your group conversation.
Okay, so come back together here. Sorry for the interruption that we had. I think there was a lot of good information in that video, things that I had never thought about. That's where I kind of would like to begin, just for conversation purposes for the next few minutes, is what is it that impressed you or shocked you or was new to you, that maybe you didn't have any awareness of? Let's start with that. And don't be afraid to just kind of share. This is, I think, an important part of kind of facilitating some of the information. As you can see on the outline I've given you, that's just bullet points there. But if you do want to go to that website, they do have a multitude of resources, including all of the references to subtopics from where they did their research. So that's up to you if you have any interest in that. So what hit you from this particular video? Is there anything that jumped out at you that you could help make others aware of because it impressed you? Anyone?
I guess I never thought of places being uninhabitable. I knew, the oceans are rising. I knew Alaska's melting. I knew about all the plastics. But I never thought about places being uninhabitable. I've seen The Day After Tomorrow, and everybody had to move south. But this is kind of the other direction they're going.
Yeah, very much so. I never thought about the plastics creating microplastics. I've never.
Oh yeah.
I never ever thought about that, and that's what really jumped out at me, is that we are consuming a lot of this, and it makes a lot of sense for me as I look back on my life. I don't know about you, but when you look back to when you were in your teens, it was very, very rare that I heard of people that had cancer when I was in my teen. Might be different for other people, but but boy, now it's almost like every fourth person is dealing with that. And so that made me connected to the microplastics and the things that we're consuming. That type of thing makes a lot more sense to me. How
Well,
about
I think back in the early days, like in the 60s and 70s, people had cancer. You weren't aware of it, but it was sort of a hush hush thing too. People didn't admit that they had it or something like that. It wasn't as well known as people come out and say it nowadays.
Yeah, I think you're right. So there might have been more than what we were aware of back then, but it just seems to me anyways that the increase of it has gone up dramatically over the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
What else impressed you? What other things jumped out at you? Well, I liked some of the illustrations that were in this. I think that old game Kerplunk that was shown at the beginning there kind of helps visualize that, yeah, any one of these things might not make that big of a difference, but when you begin to see that it all kind of contributes to the weight of one thing being pulled through, that it could create a domino effect, that type of thing. So I thought that was good. The other thing that jumped out at me was the concentration of most of these problems will be in the working class, and people that can't afford to get out of the hot zones. Of course, food shortage being a serious problem in various parts of the world. When you don't give much thought of the food that's on your table and how readily available it is to those of us who can just go to the grocery store and get it, you kind of go, oh yeah, now this makes a lot more sense to why people in some parts of the world, there's, they need help. They can't remedy this by themselves. They don't have the resources. They don't have the money. They might not have the terrain to do the type of farming. So that was a good reminder. I think the graphic on the 6 main bread baskets in the world, I haven't thought about that very much. I knew the Midwest of our own country is important, but thinking about these specific zones that produce most of the world's food is a good reminder too, that if one or two of those collapse, think about, again, starvation and food deprivation increasing dramatically there as well. Any other observations that you have on the video? What was your general feeling about it? Was it's, oh, this is too over the top, or was it kind of, wow, I just never gave much serious thought to it? Any of you have
I would have to say never gave it much thought. I mean, I hear of global warming and all that, but never looked at it this way, like all these other issues, that pollution and that causes the change in climate or whatever,
Yeah,
how is the climate getting warmer? I don't understand that.
Well, I think that's going to be into the next video a little bit.
Yeah.
But when we only talk about climate change in isolation, it seems to me it's not connected to some of these other things that is mentioned in the video. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Well, I thought that and I'm actually pretty familiar with most of what they said, but I thought their time frame was a little bit on everything was 2040, 2050. It was all they kind of every single aspect of the problem was going to come to a head at that point, and I don't really think that's going to be the case. So I thought that was where that was a little over the top, where they kept saying, in 20 years this is going to happen, in 25 years everything's going to fall apart. There's going to be a major catastrophe. I think there's also a lot of inertia in the system, both in terms of the natural system and in other ways, that it's just not all going to happen at once. I mean, now there are these linkages between them, but I think they were a little over the top in terms of the catastrophic level.
Yeah.
Within 20 years. I mean, if you think back 20 years ago was 2005. That was 5 years after, the 2000 change and all that, and Y2K was. So it's not that far off, which on the one hand makes it more urgent to do something, but on the other hand, that's where I think if you look at the data more closely, the scientific data, it would be more. It's more complicated than that. They kind of simplify that, I think.
Yeah, they seem to use 2050 as the tipping point type of, and it might not be. We don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things that could change for good or bad in some of these areas. But to put a hard date to it is sort of like trying to predict prophecy or something. And I think you got to be careful with that too. But I think what they're trying to do in this particular video, or at least is the impression I have, is on your handout there. I put in their resources, they talk about 6 stages of climate denial. It's not real. It's not us. It's not that bad. It's too expensive to fix. We can offer some great solutions, but we don't really take any action. And then it's too late. Well, again, that probably differs around the globe in terms of where we think we are as a particular community or a country. I think the one thing that is important here, at least for me, is if there are people that are just dismissive of it, hey, there's no problem, just forget about it, you know, that type of thing. I think that's a form of denial. And I think just because you don't want to put the money or the effort into trying to regulate, and I think personally, this might come out in the next couple of episodes, is, you know, you're obviously going to make the most money, any industry, if you deregulate. But is that always the best decision for our long-term perspective in calling this Earth our home? So I think what strikes me in this video is the reason it's a touch over the top in areas, I think, is to wake us up to a very poignant problem that is, if it's not in my lifetime, it certainly will be in my children's lifetime. More, more of a real danger than that I'm experiencing. And so we're to think of this generationally as well. So.
Well, the thing that scares me the most, or concerns me the most, not scares me, is the fact that I think our country will wake up more faster, and we're more technically
Not if the
oriented.
election goes
I get
the wrong
concerned.
way.
I'm more concerned about other countries around the world, where we have little control, and where there's much less concern or regulation over pollution and that sort of thing. I'm not going to name countries, but we know where they are.
Well, I think they did, though, didn't they, Bud? I think they named India and Pakistan especially as areas that would really be hit hard. And then what do you do with the billions of people that can't survive in that?
Well, that's the problem is when people get to the point where they have to, they can no longer be concerned with fixing the problem, because you're dealing day to day, hand to mouth kind of.
Yeah, right.
You know what I'm saying? So you get to that point, then it's too late to do anything on a sufficiently large scale to correct where we're going.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think that's part of what this curriculum is about, is trying to be proactive rather than reactive when it happens. And to do that, it'll take 50 years to proactively put things in place that hopefully will stop some of the ill effects that you see. I want to point one other thing out on that handout that I sent out to you. On the first page, I thought it was interesting that it was talking a little bit about some of the previous mass extinctions, 5 of them in particular, is caused by things that's kind of beyond our control. And then they talk a little bit here about the 6th mass extinction in their notes, being in relationship with some of the things that we as human beings can control. And so I thought that was an interesting distinction between the two. But when you look at some of the mammals and the extinction groups that are no longer around, whether they're dinosaurs or others, some of that is all caused by the natural changes long before there was the Industrial Revolution, that type of thing. So some things we can't control, but what are the things that we can? And I think that's kind of the point of this particular massive amount of data push in this particular video.
Well, we've seen a lot of this firsthand. We've been to Alaska several times, and the first time everything was snow white and the glaciers were bigger. The second time I noticed it had melted a little. The third time it looked like the glaciers, one in particular, looked like one of the snow piles in a parking lot after a hard winter. And it was dirty and so you can tell things are melting. You can tell the lake levels rising just, in the time we lived on the lake, it really rose. We sailed through the Great Pacific Garbage Heap, which is plastic, and it was how big is it, Bud?
1,000 miles, maybe.
It's huge. And that, the wildlife is eating all that. And, I remember my sister moved out to Southern California when I was 12. And they would have an occasional mudslide or an occasional fire. Now, everybody is having these fires. So, and the hurricanes are getting more so.
That fire last was that last summer where the Canadian
Yeah.
up in the, northwestern part of Canada, we were getting this smoke down here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And before we moved too, there was some of that because we could see the coloration over the lake.
See, Bud and Shelley, you've had the opportunity to see some of these firsthand, like your trips several times to Alaska and stuff. When some people don't have those opportunities, it's easier to deny, and then a lot of times they go, well, no, that type of thing. But I think that's really important to understand that when you personally experience these type of things, you go, you just can't look the other way on this. There is something going on, that type of thing.
Well, listen, and when you see, like, actually, I was more impressed by, we're on this cruise ship about halfway between the West Coast and Hawaii, way out in the middle of the Pacific. And you look out down on the water, and you can literally see and count big pieces of plastic going by.
That's in the middle of the garbage.
In the middle, just like it's just a garbage heap, really. I mean, I think I counted like 100 big pieces of plastic that went by within 2 or 3 minutes.
Wow.
And that's what's scary when you think you're so far out in the middle of the Pacific. How could anything get out here? How could there be any pollution and contamination? And you see that and you go, wow, it really that's actually struck me much more than the Alaska piece.
Yeah. If you think years back, I'm a sea glass collector. Years back, when my grandmother was young and probably even our parents, there was that garbage dump off Cleveland where they threw all the glass in. Well, now nothing comes in glass. It all comes in plastic. And the glass didn't disintegrate like the plastic disintegrates.
But the glass you recycled, we had pop bottles and beer bottles,
Right.
bottles, you recycled it
Right.
all.
But a lot of it, that's how the lake glass got in there.
Yeah.
And, at least that's used for decoration or to create art now or something, but it didn't the animals didn't ingest it.
Yeah. Well, these are all great points, and I think it's one of the things that I had hoped to do over the next couple of weeks is let's just get a little bit more informed, and it will certainly help us to be more empathetic with other people around the world. We talk about the migrant crisis at the border and stuff like that, but it's always just immigration issues. It's not connected to violence, and it's not connected to other things that might be connected to some of this type of things. How do you make a living in a world where you can't grow anything or whatever? So, I think it's important to be informed, and I think that's the whole goal that I have. Let's be more informed and be able to dialogue intelligently. when you talk about something like climate change and, you know, you walk out on a day in the middle of April and there's a couple of inches of snow that came down in the middle of April, and somebody says, well, there goes global warming for you. And you kind of go, okay, come on now. We got to think deeper and smarter than, you know, just shallow thinking. So,
It's not just a phrase. It's
yeah, right. That's a great point. So,
Well,
well,
that's why they call it climate change and not
Yeah.
global warming
Yeah.
anymore, because
yeah.
So who wants to buy my condo in on the beach?
we're on the 9th floor, so if the
Yeah,
first
well-
couple floors get flooded,
Todd,
Yeah.
you don't have to worry till 2050.
I know, I'm good.
Yeah. the kids will be
The kids
worried.
might complain, but
Yeah, right. That's right.
I'll
All
be
right.
mad.
Well, we'll call it quits for tonight. And thanks for your input. And sorry about the technical problems, but I'm glad we could get it in. All right.
Yep.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
everyone.
Good.
Okay.
Night.
Take care.
wait a
Bye-bye.
minute. No, 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 no. What do you think you're gonna pull here?